This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Connecticut is lucky to have many cultural institutions, but coronavirus has shut down visits to your favorite museum or performance hall for the time being. Later this hour, we'll hear how the staff at the Connecticut Historical Society has worked to share some of its exhibits online. Now, there's no question this pandemic has left the U.S. economy in big trouble. Are you an employer who doesn't know how you'll stay operational? Or are you a worker with questions about how to navigate the next few weeks and months if you become unemployed? Coming up, we'll talk with attorney Dan Schwartz of Shipman and Goodwin. Here's the number to call with your question, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. First, Governor Ned Lamont says Connecticut residents should stay home, but people are still heading out to get essentials like food. Standing near lots of customers at the local Stop and Shop or Costco is not social distancing. Now, a local farm may be a good option to pick up products or have them delivered. Many Connecticut farmers are busy getting ready for the growing season. Joining us now by phone is Bryan Hurlburt, Commissioner of the State Department of Agriculture. Commissioner, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Lucy. Thank you for having me.
I'll let our listeners know you've given me permission to call you Bryan. So first off, I wanted to, just to be clear, are Connecticut farm stands and farmers markets open for business under Governor Lamont's latest executive order?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. And the answer is yes. We worked with the governor's office last week to make sure under one of the previous executive orders that farmers markets and farm stands were essentially classified as grocery stores, providing food access in urban and rural communities, and through the guidance document that was released last evening, they're expressly permitted under Executive Order 7H.
Now, spring just started, but there have been occasional winter markets around our state. How many of those have remained open, Commissioner?
So we're actually compiling that information, and we're hoping to have it ready for today or this morning. Unfortunately, a Friday and the weekend put us a little sideways with other tasks regarding to the executive order. But we will be releasing a list. What we're doing is calling the different markets and farm stands to make sure that they are remained open. If a farmer's market was in a town library or in a public space or a school, they may not be open. And so we are working in partnership with the Connecticut Northeast Organic Farmers Association to create an interactive map so that consumers can go and look where their community is, what's open or what's nearby, and what they have available at the different farms and farmers markets. So that'll be released shortly. But right now, there's about 20 options that we know for sure are open. And I strongly encourage people to go to ctgrown.gov, and we'll have that link up there later today for them to check out the map and find how and where they can support their local farming community.
You said ctgrown.gov?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, now that COVID-19 is in our state, from your department, how are you offering guidance to farmers to deal with the fact that we have this virus among us and how that might impact their work?
Well, this is really important. The governor has done a great job of communicating best practices and reminding people, and we've done that at the department and echoed his message. So we've been sending out regular reports, distributing posters, encouraging employers, and the farmer operators, owners, or for the food manufacturers to have conversations with your employees. Make sure that they know they should be washing their hands regularly. Make sure they know that if they're not feeling well, that they shouldn't come in, and go through what the leave policy is for each individual operation. We distributed posters, both in English and Spanish, to be put up around the operation. We've included guidance from the CDC and the FDA about proper food handling and what to do, make sure that, your break rooms are wiped down, how to stagger shifts or reduce the number of people that are in one area at a certain time. It's really important that we continue to emphasize this message because these are the easy things that can be done to help reduce the spread of COVID-19. So we're consistently communicating this out, messaging this out to our regulated communities, and making sure that they see and pay attention to it in their operations. And Lucy, I started talking to people about a week and a half ago about this, just kind of thinking that they were already doing these things, and just want to remind them and see, what else we could do. And as I had more of these conversations with farmers and with manufacturers or processors, they said, "Oh, that's a good idea. We didn't have the conversation with our employees yet. Let's make sure we do that." And so, we can't take anything for granted, and it becomes really important that the department plays that role of providing information and guidance, and aggregating good information and guidance, because as I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of bad information or non-tested information out there, and we just want to make sure people know that the department is working with our partner organizations, with the folks down in D.C., around the country, to get good information out to Connecticut farmers to make sure that they're practicing safe and healthy procedures on the farm, and that will ensure that our food system remains strong and viable through all of this.
You're hearing Bryan Hurlburt on Where We Live, Commissioner of the State Department of Agriculture. And we hear about different organizations having to really be nimble and change the way they operate. How are farmers responding to this crisis? It's common for people, once the season really kicks in, to be hosting visitors on your farm where they're able to pick what they want. But that is not necessarily a smart thing when we think about social distancing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you bring this up. Connecticut farms have been in business for hundreds of years, and the only way a business stays around for that long is by being innovative and entrepreneurial and meeting customers based on new constraints or market demands. And so one of the things that we've done from the department level, and we've encouraged farmers markets and farm stands to do, is do curbside pickup or delivery. And one of our last dispatches out to the agricultural community was a list of 6 or 8 different apps that you could use to do online ordering. And so, we want to make sure that consumers feel comfortable, that the farms are using safe practices, and that they can still manage their commerce. I was emailing back and forth with a woman on Thursday night. She was asking if we had, any guidance or any information about who was open, and I sent her, the list of what we had. Turns out there was a farm in her community that was open that had instituted curbside pickup, and she was really thankful. She's immunocompromised, did not want to be in a grocery store, did not feel comfortable there, did not really want to be out any more than she needed to be, and this was a great way for her local farm to meet her needs. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
We're hearing, Commissioner, we're hearing that there are dairy farms are also delivering milk.
That's true. That's we've got a couple of dairy delivery operations, and this is another one. Mountain Dairy has gone back to home delivery. This was something they stopped doing 8 or 9 years ago. They've reinstituted it. They started delivering milk in, I believe it was 1871. So getting back to the roots, it's a terrific story about how businesses are adapting and making sure people are getting what they need through all this.
We're hearing that there are definitely vulnerable residents in our communities who may not be able to leave their homes, or they don't have certain funds to pay for food. Do we know if farmers are working with local food banks as well?
Farmers have consistently worked with local food banks. And I think right now the food banks, if I'm not mistaken, received a lot of food donations last week, as bars and restaurants and our major institutions started shutting down operations. A lot of that food was put into the emergency food system. And I think, once that supply is exhausted, and I'm not even sure that it was enough to cover the need, we'll see more farms, and the call will go out for more donations to the emergency food system and the operations. That's a critically important piece that we need to make sure that, as you said, for folks that may not have the ability, that they're still getting proper nutrition and access to food during all of this.
What kind of guidance is your department giving to farmers if they get sick or if their workers get sick? Is there a plan in place to help farms if they need help with labor, if people are getting sick and they don't have a lot of other people to lean on?
That's been part of our messaging. What is your plan for continued operations? And make sure you really think through it. That is critical. And we want everybody to be safe. We want them to practice, staying home if they can, staying away from people, continue the social distancing, doing the things like I mentioned earlier, of alternating shifts. We're going to have a virtual town hall this evening with the Connecticut Farm Bureau. And one of the points that was brought up that we should share is if you need help, we have networks. And so if for whatever reason you are short-staffed, don't bring somebody in who's got COVID or who isn't feeling well. Let's see if there's a resource in the ag community and from a neighboring farm that can help you through this. And that's part of our message this evening. Again, we want people to be safe. There's a lot of resources out there. Farmers helping farmers is something that's been going on for a very long time. And we want to, reestablish that community aspect so that everybody can get through this.
When we think about farmers markets, a lot of vendors close together, dealing with customers. I assume that you'll be recommending that with farmers markets continue, that there's like 6 feet in between people and vendors?
That's exactly it, Lucy. As we move forward with this, spread out the booths more. The farmer should have gloves on. The farmer should be the only person touching any of the foodstuffs. They should be the ones putting it in a bag. Generally the atmosphere and the environment at a farmer's market is you come up, you can, me, the customer, can touch and look and feel and see what I want, pick out the specific item. I don't think that's the way we want to do this for the next couple months. We want to make sure we're really safe. There has been no known case of COVID being transmitted on food, but let's just take extra precautions. This is something we need to take very, very seriously, and it's a minor inconvenience to not be able to pick out, your particular plant or vegetable or fruit. But it's in the best interest of you and your family and your community. So, we're going to be messaging that out as part of our guidance to farmers markets.
And one more for you, Commissioner. We know that there are some Connecticut farms that rely on seasonal workers who have temporary visas to come and work in Connecticut during the growing season. Are there any concerns from local farmers that with COVID-19, this will limit these workers from getting into the country? And then what happens if they get sick? Who takes care of them?
Yeah, that's a question that I've actually spent a lot of time on in the past few days. With embassies shutting down across the world, there's nobody there to process the H-2A paperwork. We actually had 2 conference calls with USDA Secretary Perdue last week about this. USDA is working with the department, the State Department, and the Labor Department down in D.C. To find paths through this. One of the things that USDA did announce late last week, I think it was on Thursday, is that those H-2A employees that are here in the country that would normally have to return to their home country before coming back are going to be eligible to stay, and they've publicized how you can, as a farmer who needs labor, be in touch with the appropriate agency to get those people assigned to your farm. The other piece is USDA is working with the State Department that would allow people who have regularly come in. So if you're going to be essentially a returning worker, kind of an expedited process, so you won't have to go through the normal procedure. And so, they'll be cleared to come in. Now, the question that we have that we've got to work on next is, how do we get these individuals into the country, and how do we make sure that they understand the proper safety procedures and protocols during the growing season.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, but once they arrive and if they end up getting sick, who takes care of them then?
Well, that's a great question. I think it would fall, to the normal safety net if they don't have an employer-sponsored insurance.
Well, we want to thank Bryan Hurlburt for joining us, Commissioner of the State Department of Agriculture. We'll be sure to follow up with you in the next few weeks to find out how that issue is resolved for local farms that rely on seasonal workers. Bryan, thanks for joining us here on Where We Live.
Thank you very much. Have a great show.
Again, this is from Connecticut Public Radio. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up, we're going to shift and talk about what a lot of people are worried about lately, and that's losing their job because of closures due to coronavirus. Now, we're going to talk with an attorney about what workers and their employers should know. You can join us too, especially if you have a question about unemployment or the process moving forward. 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WMPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Thousands of Connecticut workers have filed unemployment claims over the last week. Nationally, the number of Americans out of work this past week could be more than 2 million as governments and businesses shut down over coronavirus. Now, what should workers and their employers know about navigating the next few weeks and months? Attorney Dan Schwartz is a partner at Shipman and Goodwin LLP, where he practices employment law, among others. He joins us now via Zoom. Dan, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, Lucy. Nice to be with you.
Dan's also the author of the independent Connecticut Employment Law blog. We'll be sure to tweet that out at Where We Live. Dan, it's becoming the cliche, but we have to say it. We're in unprecedented times. This pandemic is shutting down governments and businesses. So many people are losing their jobs in such a short time. What kinds of questions are you getting from employers?
No, you're right. It really is unprecedented here. And I can't remember a stretch like we've had over the last few weeks. It was just a month ago when I was having conversations with employers about hiring and growing businesses. And now all of a sudden, the conversations are just very, very dark, which is, look, we have employees who we love, but we have no business coming in the door. What can we do? So a lot of the conversations have turned to how to minimize the impact on employees, allow them to continue health insurance, for example, and also get the employees on the unemployment rolls as quickly as they can under the circumstances. So it's been tough conversations all week, and the pace at which this is happening, I think, leaves everyone a little unsettled.
We all have heard by now Governor Lamont's Stay Safe, Stay Home initiative. Last night, the State Department of Economic and Community Development releasing more guidance on which businesses are considered essential during that time. Overall, what are these categories, Dan?
Yeah, so I think that the categories really fall a little less with essential and non-essential as to what, and there are clearly some that are essential: government services, utilities, manufacturing, defense industries, things around the infrastructure. But there are also some other jobs that are being allowed to continue that have very little interaction either with the public or with others. So it's a long list. We've actually been trying to parse through it last night and this morning. And I think for employers, they really need to take a careful look at that list and figure out, do they provide one of these key services either to the public or to the government? And if not, how can they take the jobs that they have and make them remote or work at home? And I think that's an important point that I think has gotten a little lost, which is the order takes some of those jobs and doesn't say you can't do the work. It's just saying we're not going to allow it in a workplace with others. And that at least preserves some jobs. There are going to be others, particularly the small businesses who need to reduce their business. The order last night did clarify that some of those small businesses can also still allow for deliveries and some curbside takeouts. They just aren't allowing the stores that are there. But I think those smaller businesses that really rely on foot traffic, those are the ones that we're hearing from and are really going to be hurting over the next couple of weeks.
You can join our conversation with Dan Schwartz, an attorney, a partner with Shipman and Goodwin, LLP. The number 888-720-9677 or 888-720-WNPR. If you're a worker or an employer unsure about the next few weeks and months, again, with shutdowns because of coronavirus, and you have a question, again, you can also tweet us at Facebook at Where We Live, and also find us on Facebook. Just search Where We Live. For people who are non-essential, if they're businesses, if employers are working remotely or doing telework, they must be paid under the law. But for employees that can't work remotely, what does that mean for them, Dan?
Yeah, that's the really tough questions, and I think there are a couple of answers that we've been giving, depending on the situation. So some employers are going to have to lay off their workers. I think in that situation, those workers are going to be eligible immediately for unemployment. There is no waiting period anymore. The employees don't have to be looking for active work, that said the Department of Labor. So employers that have to do that can put their employees on layoff and allow them to collect unemployment. Some other employers have been putting employees on what's called furlough, which essentially says, look, we don't have any work for you. You have 0 hours for the week. We're not going to pay you. That typically would allow the employee to continue to stay on the employer's health plan, which I think is a huge benefit during this time, and still allows the employee to apply for unemployment benefits at the same time. So that's been another option. For other employers, what's going to happen in the next week and a half or so is we're going to start to see the impact of the new federal legislation which was passed. That federal legislation will start providing employees with paid emergency paid sick leave and some protected leave with some pay under conditions either to care for themselves if they come down with the illness or to care for others who are coming down with the illness as well. That's not going to help people who have been laid off today, unfortunately, or furloughed today. But for those who have to continue working, that federal legislation will at least provide some minimum of a safety net.
You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677. Robert's calling from New Haven. Robert, what's your question?
My question is, I've heard that grocery stores and other big box stores that are deemed essential are actually crying out for employees, that they're short-staffed. And I'm wondering, is there a way, or has anybody considered, instead of a lot of people on unemployment, possibly sliding them over temporarily to certain vendors that are actually, desperate for employees, and as an alternative to unemployment?
Thank you, Robert, for your call. Certainly that would be an option for some people. Dan?
Yeah, no, I think it is, and I think for those, particularly, we're hearing from the so-called gig economy workers who are really hurting now. The drivers and some of that. Those are going to be options for some people. For others who need to take care of their kids at home because their kids are home from school, it may not be viable for others. But I think those that want to support the industries that are hiring. I think there are some limited jobs available. It just may not match the skill set or the skills that people are used to, and the pay that they're needing to replace. I think it's tough. We're going to see a lot of stories over the next couple of months of people who have lost their jobs, and it's going to be heartbreaking.
Before we take more calls here on Where We Live, the number 888-720-9677. I'm wondering, Dan, if you could break down the whole process with unemployment. If an employer has to lay off a worker, what should that employer be giving to their worker? What should the worker be asking for?
Yeah, so typically there's a form that's available to be filled out online, could be given to someone, called the UC61. I have to credit the Department of Labor has really done a great job of late of simplifying the process, putting it up on their website. You go to the Connecticut Department of Labor site, not the U.S. Department of Labor website, and they have packets of information that are easily either printed or you can email the links to people. And it's a simple form just to say, look, we don't have the work. You indicate sort of lack of work. We've heard, the last I heard about a week ago is that it was easier to process the application if there was a expected return to work date, say in 6 or 8 weeks. I don't know if that's still the case, just given the numbers that they've been trying to process. But that's how employers should be handling it, which is to give the employee the form or giving them the link to fill out. And the employee can do all of that now online. And can start applying for benefits from day one. And I think that process allows for some salary replacement up to a cap of it's about $600 or so dollars, a little higher than that, but it'll at least provide some protection in the short term.
You're hearing Dan Schwartz, partner at Shipman and Goodwin LLP. He practices employment law. He also blogs at the Independent Connecticut Employment Law blog. Anthony is calling into Where We Live from Gales Ferry. Anthony, you're on the show.
Hello, yes. My son is self-employed, and he has to deal with people every day. He's a carpenter, and he has to go, in fact, today he's dealing with a person at their home. How does this affect him if he can't go to the people's home and do the work? What resources does he have?
Thank you, Anthony, for your call. So someone who is self-employed, they aren't eligible for unemployment insurance, Dan?
Yeah, typically not. It depends on the buy-in process, but self-employed people, I think that's really one of the you can call it holes, gaps that are really out there. And people who are self-employed really, when something like this happens, have no good safety net to rely on. And it's challenging. And for those who are living paycheck to paycheck, it's tough to hear. And I think for the carpenters and the other workers who are out there who are doing the services in the home, I think the advice we've been telling employers is to provide as much protection as they can, to follow all the CDC guidelines about taking the necessary precautions, and trying to not take unnecessary risk. But this is going to be one of those situations where the guidance continues to change as we understand the risk and understand what we can and can't do to keep ourselves safe.
Kat on Twitter writes, my husband is self-employed consultant with 100% of his customers overseas. With international travel shut down, he didn't have any income this year. Is filing for unemployment an option because he is self-employed? Is that a no, Dan?
Probably not, but I think what we've been encouraging people to do is to go to the Department of Labor, ask, even consider filing. They may be denied, but at least they'll figure out some of those options as well. We've heard that as well on people whose hours have been reduced from a full-time and now they're only working part-time. There is a provision for partial unemployment benefits as well that people may not be aware of. So there's more that's out there. I would also encourage people, if they haven't heard yet, the Access Health Connecticut, the health exchange is now reopened its enrollment for people. So if they don't have insurance as of yet, this is the absolute right time. I think it's Access Health CT to go and get enrolled on the health insurance, because the last thing we would want is someone who isn't working who then doesn't have insurance as well. And at least this option allows for people to get enrolled right now during this special enrollment period.
Dan, that's an excellent point. We're going to tweet out information to Access Health CT at Where We Live. You can also join us again as we talk about what workers and employers should know over the next few weeks and months with attorney Dan Schwartz from Shipman and Goodwin. The number 888-720-9677 if you have a specific employment-related question. Pam's calling from Cheshire. Pam, what's your question? Pam, can you hear me? Oh, I don't think Pam can hear me. I'm going to actually put her on hold, and hopefully we can get back to her later in the hour. But I had a question for you, Dan, in terms of when someone is either ill or maybe they've been diagnosed with COVID-19, what protections are there for them in terms of being able to keep their jobs?
Yeah, so there's actually quite a bit of protections for those employees to be aware of. First, Connecticut does have paid sick leave or paid time off that needs to be provided by employers in certain job categories. It's not for everyone as of yet. So that's a good place to start, which is the Connecticut rule on paid time off. But then now we also have this new law that came out that will be effective April 2nd that will provide some additional leave. Let me back up and say Connecticut and federal law both have the Family Medical Leave Act. So if you're working at an employer with 50 or more employees, you're eligible to take time off to care for yourself or for others for a serious health condition. And I think all the guidance is suggesting that COVID-19 is that serious health condition. It's unpaid under both of those laws for now, but that's an option to take the time off and protect yourself. But starting April 2nd now, if you work at an employer under 500 employees, the employer will need to provide both this emergency paid sick leave that I was referencing, which will cover the first 80 hours, and you can get paid a different rate depending on whether you're caring for yourself or for a family member. And then after that point in time, there is some leave protections as well if you're, again, taking care of others or even taking care of a minor child who may be home because the school is closed. So there's a lot of details there. It's tough to get into on a quick call like this, but I think you want to look up the information if you're still working to understand that you're going to have some protection starting April 2nd at your workplace. And that'll be important for people who sometimes feel like they have to go into work sick. Now, with this protections, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be taking the leave that's being provided to you by the government.
Let's take some calls now. Marie is calling from Niantic. Marie, you're on the show.
Hi. I'm just wondering if you could address the issue of paid time off. I have two friends who both have had their hours reduced by their employers. One is being forced to use paid time off for the reduced hours, and the other one is being prohibited from using paid time off. I'm just wondering if you could address that and whether there's any ruling in the state of Connecticut about that and how that affects their claim if they wanted to claim unemployment. Thank you.
All right, Dan.
You're welcome. I think first off, let's state the obvious, which is this has been a sort of unique situation, and I think things have been, and the guidance that we've been giving and hearing keeps changing a little bit over time. So I'm not surprised to hear sort of different stories and how different employers are handling this. I think there was an initial time a couple of weeks ago where people said, "Oh, we'll just give them time off, and we'll make them use their paid time off," and that can be okay about that. Other employers are now realizing, geez, the time off policies that we have aren't really covering this situation, and we may be giving sort of this supplemental time off that we didn't plan for, but can be allowed. I think the basic rule is employers have some flexibility on the paid time off rules about requiring employees to use it or not use it. I think if you're an employer that's out there, we've been encouraging them to be flexible, be understanding, with the goal that what you really want to do is make sure your workplace stays as COVID-19 free as possible, and encouraging employees to stay home if they're sick or have a family member is sick is probably one of the best ways to do so. So I think to the extent employers have the rules, it's sort of looking at them and relooking at them and trying to figure out what works best for their particular workplace.
And just to clarify, if you're at home in quarantine because somebody in your household may be ill but not diagnosed yet with COVID-19, an employer, do they have to pay you during that time of quarantine?
They don't as of yet. I think as of April 2nd, when this federal law kicks in, that's going to trigger some of the paid sick leave and FMLA protections that are kicking in. So that's why I said the rules keep changing as we've been dealing with this. I think in discussions we've had with employers, we've said, hey, look, if you don't need to pay someone, you ought to consider whether you can do so during this time. It'll help bring that employee back sooner. And under the circumstances, I think a lot of employers have been understanding where they can afford it.
Pam's calling from Cheshire. Pam, are you there?
Yes.
All right, what's your question?
Yes, I was wondering on the separation packet, how do you designate that it's a furlough? And when you mentioned it allowed employers to continue health benefits, I was wondering if that's mandatory or optional, and if an employer does continue them, do they have to continue them until they're called back, especially since we don't know how long this is going to go on?
Thank you, Pam. Dan Schwartz.
Yeah, so good questions. I think for the furlough, it's just simply a lack of work. And you can also write in the other and explain that we don't have the work for people. In terms of the health insurance question, it's a good question, and you should really talk with your plan administrators, your agents, your companies to understand what your plan actually says. I said earlier, most plans can be continued, but it really depends on the language of the plan. So you want to look at that. As to whether the employer needs to do that, typically if an employee is going from full-time down to either part-time or no time, it really does become the employer option as to whether the employee is eligible to continue or not. So you're going to want to look at those plans in particular. One important point, even under that circumstance or someone else is laid off, that would likely trigger COBRA, and COBRA is the continuation of health benefit law that is out there. And so even if someone is laid off, they can continue the health insurance. Now, it's at a high rate, and if the employer isn't able to supplement their portion or pay for the premiums, it may be unaffordable to some, but at least the health insurance is still out there for those that can that need it.
We're going to take one more call. Larry's calling from Terryville. Larry, we just have a couple of minutes. Go ahead quickly.
Yes, thank you for doing this. I have two quick questions. Well, not quick, but I have a daughter in Connecticut, daughter in New York City. The daughter in Connecticut, they're both going to be laid off eventually. The daughter in Connecticut is debating whether to leave her job because her children are no longer able to go to daycare. If she does leave her job, by her choice, will she be able to collect unemployment? My daughter in New York City has been reduced 25% in pay, and she's going to be laid off eventually. When she gets laid off, will she be able to collect based on her 100% salary that she used to get?
Thank you, Larry. So let's start with the woman in New York in terms of reduced salary. He wants to find out how much she can collect.
So I will not pretend to be a New York expert. I think the best advice we can give people is to look at the website for New York. I think each state has some different rules. As we've been talking with employers in different states, I was surprised to learn Florida, for example, has really, really low unemployment reimbursement rates, far, far lower. I think their cap is something like $250. So understand that what the rule is in Connecticut may not apply in New York. And I think the best thing to do is look at the website, look at some of the resources that are out there for the employees and for individuals, and try to figure that out, because the rules are changing. New York, for example, offers some disability leave that Connecticut doesn't have, and they just implemented that a week or two ago. So you want to look at that.
And then quickly, for the daughter that wants to leave her job to take care of her kids who are home from school, if she leaves willingly, does that mean she's not able to apply for unemployment, Dan?
That's a little bit unclear at this point. Okay. I think, and I would want that person to check with the Department of Labor. They put out a frequently asked questions that was just released in the last couple of days or so from the Connecticut Department of Labor. Typically, resignations are not eligible for unemployment, but in this circumstance where someone has to take care of their kids and doesn't really have a choice, the Department of Labor may be offering some more flexibility and may redefine things. So you'll want to look at that and be careful when you're doing that.
Dan Schwartz, a partner at Shipman and Goodwin LLP. Dan, thank you so much for answering our listeners' questions. We appreciate your time, and we hope to have you back as, again, we look to see how the labor industry, market, and jobs change over the next few weeks and months. Dan, thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, as always.
And you can check out Dan's independent blog at Connecticut Employment Law Blog. We'll tweet that out at Where We Live. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. After the break, we're going to find out how some local cultural institutions are trying to stay connected to their patrons despite having to close. You can join us too. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Joining us now via Zoom is Ilene Frank, Chief Curator of Connecticut, the Connecticut Historical Society. Ilene, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We wanted to reach out to you because so many museums and other places are closed because of the coronavirus shutdown. Tell us about the status of the Connecticut Historical Society and how are you hoping to still reach patrons?
Absolutely. So we are complying with the governor's executive order. We have been closed to the public for more than a week now, and that will continue through at least April 22nd, according to the executive order. So we're doing a lot of learning, like everyone else, how to use all these virtual platforms and moving our content online to things like Zoom, using our YouTube channel more, our social media. We want to make sure that we stay connected to all of our friends and members of the Connecticut Historical Society.
We just have a few minutes. Walk us through some of the online exhibits that people can see when they go to your website. And what is the website again?
Our website is chs.org. And on that website, we have a couple of features that people might want to look at. There's a virtual exhibit of G. Fox for those who remember the great department store. We also have a really great timeline of LGBTQ history. That was from a project we did last year in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. And on our Facebook page and our YouTube page, just on Saturday, we launched a short video of our Pieces of American History Connecticut Quilts exhibit, which we were so impressed. It's already had over 1,200 views just since Saturday, which is way more than any other video that we usually post. So people are responding to this new way of getting history content. We're hoping that it provides some education, some entertainment during these trying days, and we're going to continue to produce more content.
How is the Connecticut Historical Society working with local school districts and parents who are now homeschooling their children while trying to work as well?
Yeah, so our education staff is reaching out to the teachers and the school districts. Normally, we serve 14 to 16,000 students on site and through outreach programs. Those, of course, have all been canceled at the moment. So they're working with those teachers to look at how we can continue to do distance learning, convert some of our programs, especially our Revolutionary War history programs, into a distance learning experience. So that is evolving as we speak. And for families, we have a very, very popular Free First Saturday program, which April 4th would have been our next one. We were going to celebrate Earth Day. And again, the education team is converting that to an online presentation where families can sit down. They'll be able to be guided through a craft with household products, learn a little bit about the history of Earth Day, and maybe still have that experience that they would have had in the museum, just in their own homes.
When you talk about online programming, so are you thinking also about how people can connect via Zoom, for instance, and hear from educators?
Yeah, so we definitely, want to look at the platforms that allow a connection and conversation. So Zoom is something that we are using more. We are looking into hosting maybe a weekly Ask a Historian, Ask a Curator coffee hour, and just have a subject matter and kind of have a little chat. Bring your mug and join us for a talk. So we're so thankful that in 2020, we have these technologies where we can still connect with our community.
This all sounds really valuable, but at the same time, museums like yours rely on members and donors. How can museums, historical societies stay afloat during this pandemic? You're closed till April 22nd. It may be extended.
Yes, and that is a real concern. I mean, there is definitely a loss of revenue, like so many businesses are seeing right now. And the museum community in Connecticut is almost 800 institutions. If you count, all of the history, art, science, aquariums, zoos, we contribute over $402 million in economic impact to the state. And so we are having to look at how we can get support from our members and donors during these times when everyone's being asked to reevaluate their giving. And then also maybe there might be a time when we are able to provide some of this content with a small donation button or something. It is a concern, and we all have employees that we want to keep employed. I'm so thankful for the conversation earlier about what businesses are doing. The not-for-profit community, and especially the cultural not-for-profit community, is definitely a business sector, and we have those same concerns as agriculture, as small business, retail. So we are looking to stay afloat.
Are you talking with other historical societies in other states to see how they're also trying to stay operational during these times, Ilene?
Yes, I mean, we're definitely looking at the Connecticut community with Connecticut League of History Organizations and Connecticut Humanities, two statewide organizations that bring us together as a community. But we are looking also to our colleagues through the New England Museum Association and others about what they're doing, how they're delivering services, how they're trying out new technologies. And so that's one of the nice things about the museum cultural community is we are collaborative and we like to talk to each other, and however we can help each other through this, we will.
Well, we want to thank you, Ilene, for joining us here on Where We Live to provide some of those online resources, pointing our listeners, parents especially, to these online exhibits at your website. We'll make sure that we'll tweet those out at Where We Live, also share it on Facebook and our website, WNPR.org/Where We Live. Ilene Frank is Chief Curator of the Connecticut Historical Society. Ilene, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy.
Today's show produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Katie Tolarski helped out on the phones today. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Again, if we're missing a particular story or angle in your community as much of the state is shut down because of the coronavirus pandemic, please email me at lucy@ctpublic.org and we'll be sure to follow up. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.